Solomon's warning when a large house becomes an emotional prison. In the Book of Proverbs, attributed to Solomon, we find a striking sentence. Better to live on a corner of the roof than share a house with a quarrelsome wife. At first glance, this sounds like an ancient proverb about marital discord. But if we read it carefully, it is not merely about marriage. It is about structure. It is about the architecture of human relationships. Solomon is not contrasting a mansion with a shack. He is contrasting peace with coercion. A large house represents material security, social stability, outward success. A corner of the roof represents exposure, discomfort, even vulnerability. Yet Solomon declares that vulnerability with peace is preferable to comfort within conflict. Why? Because the most unbearable human suffering is not poverty. It is relational captivity. A person can endure financial hardship if the relational environment is stable. But when a relationship becomes a system of constant pressure, when every disagreement turns into a demand for allegiance, when every tension escalates into an ultimatum, that relationship ceases to be shelter. It becomes a psychological prison. And this is where parents must shift their perspective. If you have a son who is about to marry, this is not a matter of emotion. It is a matter of structure. Conflict itself is not the problem. Every marriage contains conflict. The question is not whether conflict will arise, but how it will be processed. There are two fundamentally different orientations toward conflict. 1, those who regulate and adjust. 2, those who resolve by cutting off. The first type sees conflict as a dynamic process. The second sees conflict as a verdict. In this fourth session, we are examining how to distinguish between these orientations, particularly when tension arises between a wife and her in-laws. The goal is not to judge a person. The goal is to understand whether, under stress, this individual moves toward calibration or toward deletion. Let us examine a revealing question. Imagine the husband says, "There may be conflict between you and my parents, but they are still my parents. I cannot completely sever contact. I am willing to adjust boundaries so that you are not. Uncomfortable, but I cannot erase them from my life." How does she respond? A psychologically stable person typically answers in terms of negotiation. We can find a middle ground. Let's set limits that work for everyone. Maybe we reduce contact without cutting it off entirely. Notice the orientation process, adjustment, dialogue. But listen carefully. If the response shifts into absolutism, then it will be hard to stay married. That's a difference in values. There is no middle option. Either we cut ties or we don't. The phrase difference in values often sounds sophisticated. In Western discourse, it carries moral authority, but functionally, it can serve as a conversation terminator. It can close negotiation by reframing disagreement as incompatibility. When someone says, "There is no middle," what you are hearing is binary cognition. And binary cognition inside family systems is structurally unstable. Another diagnostic question is this: when relationships deteriorate, who do you believe is responsible? A mature response is rarely accusatory. It is typically systemic. Maybe expectations weren't aligned. Perhaps both sides misunderstood each other. Family integration is complicated. Such responses indicate an awareness that relationships are co-constructed. But if responsibility is always externalized, they are the problem. That entire family system is toxic. There's no point trying, they won't change. Then repair becomes unlikely. When causality is permanently located outside the self, revision becomes impossible. No system can be recalibrated if one party refuses to see themselves as part of the system. The deeper diagnostic question, however, reaches into personal history. Have you ever completely cut someone off? Do you regret that decision? Pay attention to emotional texture. A stable person may say, "I distanced myself, but it's complicated. At the time, I thought it was necessary, but I still think about it. I'm not sure it was the best solution. Notice the presence of ambivalence. Ambivalence is psychologically healthy. It indicates that the person understands relational decisions as layered, not absolute. But when someone responds, no regrets. If someone crosses my line, I remove them. Family doesn't mean you have to tolerate discomfort. What appears as strength may in fact be habituated deletion. Here is the crucial distinction. The extreme type does not sever relationships because they hate the other party. They sever because discomfort activates elimination. For them, cutting off is not a tragic last resort. It is a principle. It is framed as clarity, as boundaries, as self-respect. Now, let us address the modern language of boundaries. In contemporary Western psychology, boundaries are considered healthy, and indeed they are. But how boundaries are conceptualized matters. A stable individual sets behavioral boundaries and then negotiates adjustment when discomfort arises. Respect is reciprocal. A borderline orientation blends emotional states with moral claims. If I feel hurt, the relationship must pause. A high-risk orientation defines boundaries emotionally and enforces them structurally. If I feel hurt, the relationship ends. That difference is not semantic. It is architectural. When conflict persists over time, stable individuals continue investing in repair, even if slowly. Conditional individuals maintain connection only if terms are met. High-risk individuals conclude this relationship is no longer viable and disengage. Solomon's proverb was not misogynistic commentary. It was structural wisdom. A house becomes unlivable not because of its size, but because of its relational operating system. For parents, the question is not, is she good or bad? The question is, when tension escalates, does she move toward dialogue or toward erasure? Does she interpret disagreement as a puzzle to solve or as evidence that someone must be removed? Marriage is not sustained by romance. It is sustained by conflict processing strategy. Your child's marriage will become either a lifelong refuge or an environment of perpetual ultimatum, depending on this hidden architecture. If this reflection has been helpful, consider subscribing, liking, and sharing. It may support other parents navigating similar concerns. Now, let us continue. And this is precisely where we must continue from the previous question. If marriage is sustained not by romance, but by conflict processing strategy, then the most decisive variable is this. Where is the husband placed inside the structure of conflict? The position of the husband, partner, mediator, or shield. Now we enter the most critical domain of the entire checklist. How a prospective wife positions. Her husband reveals the future architecture of the marriage. A psychologically stable woman sees her husband as a partner, a co-builder, an equal agent navigating complexity together. She does not demand that he choose. She does not frame loyalty as a zero-sum game. She assumes differentiation is possible, that a man can love his wife deeply without amputating his parents. But there are other patterns. A borderline separation type may cast the husband as a mediator, not overtly, not aggressively, but implicitly. She expects him to regulate tension, to translate emotions, to soften messages, to handle his parents so she does not have to. And then there is the high-risk configuration. In this structure, the husband is no longer partner or mediator. He becomes shield. He becomes proxy. He becomes proof of loyalty. You decide. You need to stand on my side. I can't believe you're even hesitating. In that moment, he is no longer a relational bridge. He becomes a battleground. And here is the critical point. The warning signs in this checklist are not determined by one answer. They are revealed through repetition across domains. The question is never, is she a bad person? The real question is, when conflict intensifies, does she move toward integration or toward separation? A hard conclusion. At this stage, we must articulate something uncomfortable. The extreme severance type does not cut off because relationships deteriorate. They cut off because they lack the internal capacity to sustain tension while preserving connection. This distinction matters. Now, many parents ask, if a daughter-in-law doesn't get along with in-laws, does that increase divorce rates? Isn't distancing normal in modern marriages? Yes, conflict is normal. Distance can even be healthy. But there is a structural difference between managed conflict and total severance. Conflict can be negotiated. Severance restructures the marriage itself. The risk factor is not the existence of in-laws. The risk factor is the algorithm used when discomfort appears. The relational algorithm of severance. Let us describe it clearly. Step 1. Discomfort emerges. It is interpreted emotionally. I was disrespected. They crossed a line. This is unacceptable. Causality is externalized. Step 2. Instead of calibrated dialogue, distance is introduced. Contact slows. Messages go unanswered. Visits are postponed. If distance relieves emotional pressure, the strategy is reinforced. Step 3. Distance hardens into structural cutoff. Calls are blocked. Visits refused. The relationship is reclassified as unnecessary. At this point, severance is no longer an event. It is a method. And here is the crucial insight. This algorithm does not limit itself to in-laws. It can apply to spouses, to siblings, to friends, to colleagues. The problem is not a particular person. It is the habit of choosing elimination over regulation. From this perspective, in-law severance is not the cause of divorce. It is an early expression of a deeper relational operating system. The 3-stage path toward divorce. When severance escalates into marital breakdown, it often follows 3 stages. Stage 1. The test. The initial cutoff often appears subtle. Holiday absence, avoiding calls, refusing visits, insisting the husband go alone. Each behavior can be justified individually. I'm not feeling well this year. It's too stressful. You can go. I'll sit this one out. But beneath the surface lies a different question. Are you with me or with them? This is not a request for adjustment. It is a loyalty test. When repeated, it creates chronic pressure. The husband begins to feel that love must be proven through exclusion. Stage 2. The husband's psychological erosion. Most husbands do not immediately choose sides. They attempt mediation. They tell their wife, "My parents didn't mean harm." Can we find a middle ground? They tell their parents, "She's under stress. I'll handle it." They soften messages. They absorb tension. They manage calendars to prevent direct confrontation. They believe they are solving the problem. In reality, they are internalizing it. Because for the severance-oriented personality, mediation can feel like betrayal. Not choosing fully becomes evidence of disloyalty. Over time, 3 psychological outcomes emerge. 1. Chronic guilt. 2. Learned helplessness. 3. Emotional burnout. The husband becomes exhausted not because he chose wrongly, but because the structure offers no stable position. He cannot be son and husband simultaneously without being accused by one side. Eventually, emotional depletion replaces engagement. Stage 3, structural collapse. When burnout becomes chronic, detachment follows. Resentment builds, communication thins, intimacy erodes, and the original in-law conflict becomes secondary. The marriage destabilizes not because of parents, but because of how conflict was processed. The final principle, the ancient wisdom attributed to Solomon, reminds us that peace inside a small shelter is better than wealth inside relational chaos. The issue is not who is right. The issue is how tension is metabolized. The extreme severance type does not cut off because they hate. They cut off because they cannot tolerate unresolved tension without resorting to removal. And this pattern, once activated, rarely confines itself to one relationship. The greatest psychological cost is often paid by the husband, trapped between loyalty and love, attempting mediation, slowly eroding under impossible expectations. In the next session, Daughter-in-Law Interview, Part 5, we will analyze in detail the psychological collapse of the husband, placed in this structure step by step. If you are a parent, a husband or someone preparing for marriage, that discussion is essential. Marriage is not sustained by affection alone. It is sustained by the method through which two people process inevitable conflict. Subscribe, like, and share if this series is helping you think more clearly. We continue in the next episode.